Hello, America. Tonight I want to talk to you about the border, and this is a plea to the president. I think the answer is clear, and you are being torn apart from forces on the outside. If we look and say, what is the single most divisive issue tearing the entire world apart, not just America, the entire world, I think it's easy. No question, it would be immigration. Whether it's immigration policy as a whole, a massive influx of migrants, transnational drug or human smuggling operations, you spin the globe and just close your eyes and point to a country, and every time you'll land on probably some place that is being torn apart right now over the issue of migration. There would be no Brexit if there wasn't mass migration. There's no way the EU would be splintering apart right now without mass migration. Remember, Brexit and the EU, where did those people come from? Let me ask you this, here in the Americas, would Donald Trump be president right now if it wasn't for the government mismanagement on the border, along with a million other things? But that was the main key. I'm not sure he would be. We're being torn apart, and he was the only guy saying, I will solve it. Now, we're not actually being torn apart. To be more accurate, I want to be really clear on this. There's an important distinction. We're being turned inside out. You can be torn apart by accident, but to be turned inside out, that takes careful, coordinated, and engineered strategy, and I'm going to show it to you tonight, and I'll show you who's responsible, and it's way beyond George Soros. It takes a partnership. It takes a partnership between supportive elements pushing down at the top, while you have the foot soldiers pushing up from the bottom, and it squeezes the average person. If you ask any logical person that believes in the rule of law, if they believe the border issue is a crisis, it is obvious. People are living under a bridge. They're living in cages. We know all of this. But here's what we get from the top. Watch.
This is not an emergency, and the president's fear-mongering doesn't make it one. A policy dispute about our southern border does not constitute a national emergency. Democrats support and have always supported strong border security. But the fact is, according to the CBP, apprehensions at our southern border are at historic lows.
Apprehensions are, that's interesting, historic lows. I want you to know, the last time we had a crisis, Barack Obama was in office, and that crisis, the top number was 60,000 people were pouring into our country in 1 month. Well, there were 58,000 apprehensions on the southwest border in January. That number skyrocketed to 76,000 in February. The numbers for just the first 2 months of this year nearly double those of the last 5 years, and the second month is higher than it was in the crisis of Obama. Now, the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was estimating that the numbers for March will be near or over 100,000. That is more than we've seen in over a decade. That's an historic low. Even the Washington Post is calling it record levels and a new high. They called it unprecedented mass migration. The Trump administration is overwhelmed, but I am telling you right now, I claim it is being done intentionally to him. This is Cloward and Piven, wave after wave after wave of people. In October, he ordered over 5,000 troops to the southern border to beef up security. Sounds totally reasonable. This past January, he pressured Mexico to change their immigration policies and to bottleneck migrants coming up from Central America into southern Mexico. Again, totally reasonable. Last week, the Trump administration announced that they were pulling nearly $750 million in aid to Central American countries that are failing to get a hold of the situation. Again, unbelievably reasonable, I think. But none of this has worked. None of it. Meanwhile, the walls are not getting built and the caravans keep trucking north. Why? Congress. Congress and their allies. Top down, bottom up. The president is now at a point where he appears that he's willing to empty the barrel and just start completely over. And Mr. President, you should. Please, I'm begging you. Look to a different solution. You cannot fix a broken arm with painkillers. You have to reset the bone. You have to treat the cause and not the symptom. And I'm going to show you the cause tonight. First, let me start here. This is what I said about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I said George Soros would form a shadow government. He likes to control the airwaves. He destabilizes a state with a crisis, provokes election crisis, begins protests to accuse fraud. That's how he destabilizes nations. I also, every day for the last year I was at Fox, I said these things. Anarchists, Islamists, communists, and socialists would work together against Israel, work together against capitalism, work together to overthrow stability. Protests would become contagious. They would cascade. They would sweep the Middle East. It would lead to a caliphate. It would begin to destabilize Europe and the rest of the world. Here's what we know. Has George Soros formed a shadow government? Yeah. The Democratic Party I was talking about 10 years ago is not the Democratic Party today. It's the new Democratic Party. Control the airwaves? Do I even need to say it? Destabilize the state with crisis. He funded the anarchists in Oakland or Berkeley and Portland, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and he is currently financing the caravans. Provoked the election crisis. Well, his good buddy was running for president, and they were the ones who found the Russian dossier, and the mainstream media helped them. And they claimed that the president wasn't legitimate. He had worked together. Think about how twisted you have to be to want to believe that the president, I don't care who it is a spy or doing espionage for another country that's an enemy. They were disappointed when that wasn't true. But who was behind all that? The left, the radical left. Now they're taking down the Electoral College. They begin protests and accuse fraud. Do I need to go any further than just the first week after he was inaugurated? Anarchists, Islamists, communists, and socialists. You know, they said, this was the big thing. Oh, he's crazy. Islamists and socialists would never work together. No Islamist would ever work with a socialist. Oh, how right they were again. So, they worked together. Anti-Israel, against capitalism, overturning stability. It did cascade. It swept the Middle East. It destabilized, created a caliphate. All those migrants went up. Europe was told, you have to take them, by George Soros and his kind. You have to take them, said the European Union. That has destabilized Europe. It has caused Brexit, and now it is spreading to the rest of the world, North America and South America. A storm is coming. There are hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers on backlog, and there are more coming. Caravans are increasing in size and frequency. This is a human wave. The pressure from the bottom up is increasing at an unprecedented rate. I talked about this 9 years ago in 2010. Listen. The bottom up, top down, and inside out theory. Here, you have it, top down. You've got the people in power up at the top, appointed by the president. You have them here. They are organizing the bottom layer. They are organizing people to stand up, to turn us inside out. You have Latinos being organized. You have unions now being organized in the unemployment battle. You have unions in our churches. There's a reason why I played that clip, and it's the last couple of sentences. Latinos organizing in the labor movement, unions in our churches. It's a bottom-up strategy that began in the 1960s as a Mexican nationalist Marxist-Leninist movement. Somehow it culminated into what we're seeing today. But why didn't they have the success in the 60s through the 2000s that they're having today? Because they never had the top-down support structure that they have now in the new Democratic Party. It all began, as I will show you in a minute, as all good progressive stories do, in Chicago. Open borders, sanctuary cities, and migrant caravans designed to overload the system and turn it inside out. It is being orchestrated by a group of Marxists from Chicago, paid for by George Soros and others. It's a family of activists that have been active for decades, and everybody turns their eye. The base of operations, a church. You want to pull it up by the roots? I'll show you how to do it the Chicago way next. All right, if you want to pull it up by the root, you have to look at its goals and who is really spreading the poison. The goal of any bottom-up movement is to apply significant amount of pressure from a small amount of people in order to influence the majority of the country. That in turn affects policy decisions in the government, but none of that works if there isn't a significant influence willing to support them from inside the government or the top. And none of it works at all without exposure in the media via protest rallies or caravans. I want to take you back. We first started hearing about the caravans exactly 1 year ago last month. Last spring, journalists from BuzzFeed embedded with and began reporting on the migrant caravan organized by a group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, or People Without Borders. It seemed weird that they had somebody embedded in something that I had never even heard of. Why? Well, we tracked down the groups associated with them and we found some of the usual suspects. George Soros had put well over $1 million into it, and they apparently put that money to work. The Associated Press reported just a few months ago that People Without Borders had been busy. At the time of that article in December, they were responsible for 4 of the caravans. The AP reported that the group, quote, help charter the route, arrange the bus transportation, negotiate with Mexican officials to provide protection. It also raised more than $46,000 online for emergency housing and food. They're no longer trying to stay under the radar. The press is starting to report on them, and they're eating it up. They're even bragging on social media that they are the, quote, group that accompanied the largest caravan so far. But who are they? Who are the people behind People Without Borders? When I talked about this last April, I noted that very little was known about them, who was behind them. All we had were a few ground operations and the ground operation level organizers. Well, now we have more. So who are they? Well, they're actually a group of nobodies, as long as you consider the who's who in Marxist, Leninist, communist activism based in Chicago, a nobody. We're going to start with Mama Bear, Emma Lozano. She is currently listed now as the executive director of People Without Borders. She's also the head and the founder of another group based out of Chicago called Centro Sin Fronteras, or Center Without Borders. So you got the people and the center. Now, Emma is part of a Marxist activist family that spans decades. Her brother was Rudy Lozano. Rudy, he founded the Center for Autonomous Social Action, or CASA. They were a Marxist-Leninist group that advocated ethnic Mexican class revolution and preached about a world without borders. Back then, Rudy was known as Compañero Rudy, or Comrade Rudy. A study from the UC San Diego described these 2 young activists from Chicago as, and I quote, the latest members of a zealous group of college students, community organizers, and young professionals. They strove to lead and build a national immigrant rights movement vis-a-vis CASA, informed by far-left politics, Marxist-Leninist thought, a communist ideology based on the theories of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, with the international worldview. They called for a collective mobilization. Oh, socialists aren't communists. Really? Because these guys are. Rudy's son, Pepe, now this is Emma's nephew. He's in a new class all by himself. He's another echelon community organizer and activist in Chicago. In 2005, he was a member of the Communist Youth League. Love that. And in 2006, he graduated to just the regular Communist Party USA. He was listed as a member, just a chip off the old block. Now, Dad, unfortunately, was murdered in Chicago, so Rudy is out of the picture. But his sister, Emma, founded Center Without Borders. She did this because she's a true believer in people. Now, People Without Borders would soon follow. But we're not close to exposing the crazy family here. Emma's husband is a man named Walter Coleman. Slim is what they like to call him. I haven't heard that for a while. Anyway, both Walter and Emma are co-pastors at a church, Lincoln United Memorial Church. Now, this is great because this is another who's who among the Marxists in Chicago. In the late 1980s, he helped elect a woman called Helen Schiller, Chicago City Council. Helen, of course, was a Marxist. She was famous for organizing the white support arm for the Black Panthers, which we all love, called Intercommunal Survival Committee. The Chicago Tribune called her, quote, a career revolutionary. This is starting to sound a little like a twisted version of the Brady Bunch, where Karl Marx is the father and Friedrich Engels, I'm home, sweetheart, donning a blonde wig. But remember, there is no such thing as gender, so that's okay. And the family that engages in revolutionary class warfare together stays together. In 2006, Emma and Walter were both pastors at the United Methodist Church. Now, Coleman, who had been, who'd gone from a relatively quiet, out to pasture kind of days as an activist, suddenly found himself thrust back into Chicago newspapers when he very publicly allowed his church, you'll remember this story. Do you remember her? Elvira? She was so sad. She wasn't a communist. She was just somebody who was here just to make it with her son. And we wanted to send her back. She had been deported in 1997 for fraud, but she re-entered the U.S. the same year and then was rearrested in 2002. But instead of, facing deportation, she just went to church. And she sought refuge with the Marxist Brady Bunch inside. Now, Elvira, under Lozano and Coleman's tutelage, became the face of the growing sanctuary city movement. These are the people that brought that to you. She founded an organization called Latino Families United. It was advocating for sanctuary, amnesty, and a partnership with this organization. Oh. And she had a new idea. How about migrant caravans? Oh, man. Now, how did we find all of this? Well, it's always in the sticky wicket in the details. The address for Coleman's Methodist Church is 2176 West Division Street in Chicago, which is such a coincidence because that happens to be exactly the same address for Latino Families United and People Without Borders. Man, that's a crowded church. Or it's just a small group of revolutionaries that believe in communist rule and are working to destroy our nation and all that we hold dear. But it's really only a small number of people with a ridiculous amount of funding from bottom-up activist organizations. Groups like the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, or Clinic, who I exposed last year as getting funding from George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. The Lozanos work hand in hand with some of the most radical Marxist leftists in the entire country. If the Communist Party USA is pushing an agenda, you are sure to find the Marxist Brady Bunch foot soldiers leading the charge. Here's an ad for a Marxist rally in Chicago against the police. It drew the finest from the far left. Oh, look, there's Angela Davis and the Communist Party USA, and of course, Carol Brady herself. These are the people advocating, organizing, and pushing immigrant rights. They are Marxist, communist activists from Chicago who are leading the charge. Their push for open borders is all about international workers of the world unite. That is a communist idea. And they are being helped also within our own government. Don't think that the new Democratic Party has a problem with Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist communists. They are supporting from the very top. They are supporting and even enabling their mission. People like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, and now the newcomers like Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar. They are the top-down movement, and it's materializing now with their masks fully off. I said there would be a time when that would happen, and we are here, which means we're running out of time. Mr. President, if you want to end this, You have to go to the root, and the root is a communist, Marxist infiltration at the highest levels and at the local level. But it goes even further. Ami Horowitz did an interview recently with Judicial Watch after returning from one of the caravans that Emma Lozano's People Without Borders had coordinated. He saw an organizer from another organization giving direct support. Watch.
I would say also what was surprising to me, two more things, actually more than two things, well, I'll mention two more things. First of all, mobile hospitals, children's services. The UN is highly involved in getting them the caravan through. It was incredible degree of services that were involved there.
You said UN. Just want to pause for a second.
Yeah.
Do you know what particular entities or what offices of the UN were involved?
There's a whole number of them. Most prominently was the UN High Commission of Refugees,
right?
UNHCR,
yep.
which is the organization, and UNICEF. Those are the two most highly profile and the organizations that were largely involved in this thing.
United States of America should not be giving money, billions of dollars, to an organization that stands against us. How much money do we give the UN every year? It's only about $8 billion too much. This is both a UN and US government-supported operation, the Caravan, an operation being driven by radical Marxist communists, and it is being supported by those at the top in Washington. Their goal is to overwhelm the system, to turn our government completely inside out, and we're nearing their end game. Wave after wave after wave of people. That's what's happening. It's the human wave theory. It's a strategy in war. You just keep throwing people at the problem, and pretty soon the system is broken. Who these people are and what their Marxist agenda actually is has been exposed. It's now up to you to get the word to your congressman, to your senator, to the president. Show them this information, because we are playing a game with the press, and they will never expose this. Do not ever take my word for this. Look all of this stuff up yourself. It's all in the public domain.